I'm Dr. Dave Lucas. Welcome to All Points. We have a very special program for you this evening. We hope that you'll stay with us, and we look forward to sharing this evening with you. We have Mr. Chris Saunders with us this evening, and the reason I'm so happy about that is that he has for many years, and we'll get into that in just a moment, been researching the Underground Railroad. And there is a new and a heightened interest, once again, in the role of those who participated in the Underground Railroad, those people who were on the white side of things, trying to empower people to be free, and then especially those blacks who came across the Ohio River and stayed here and vigilantly tried to help other people. So we're going to talk about all that. Some of this is a little more hideous for me. I want to warn you up front that we have some artifacts to show you this evening that are just, well, it's grievous what they were used for. But we want you to see this to know that this is real. This isn't a made-up story. This isn't some kind of myth or legend. This is all based on fact, and Chris here has done the factual research to be able to talk about it. So Chris Saunders, welcome to All Points. We're glad to have you.
Thanks, Dr. Lucas.
How long would you say that you have been researching the Underground Railroad?
Probably in the local area, probably somewhere between 15 and 20 years.
I thought it had been around 20 years because I remember the first time chatting with you out in the parking lot at Ohio University about your research, and it appears to me it was 15, maybe 20 years ago. Now, you attended Ohio University Southern Campus, is that correct?
Yes, sir. And well, in fact, you were one of my instructors there.
That's right. How long did you go there?
I think I graduated in 2006, but I graduated and got my bachelor's degree from there.
What is your major?
My major is behavioral science.
Behavioral science. But you took a lot of history.
I did.
You took Bob Leith's courses.
A lot of them, yes.
And you became renowned by other people to talk about the Underground Railroad, and particularly in this area, but haven't you sort of expanded that as well? Is that
yes,
correct?
I've spoken at the West Virginia State Archives, spoken at the National Freedom Center in Cincinnati, and I've worked on a nationally syndicated television show, which was Finding Your Roots, which is on PBS and still on air, and it was hosted by Dr. Henry Louis Gates.
That's wonderful. So you've got a long record of that. So we want to let you know, as you watch today, that he is available to come speak to various organizations. Isn't that correct? Still available?
Yes, sir.
And would you care to give them a contact of some way? I don't know if you want to do email or if you have a web page or Facebook or what you want them to do.
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Chris Saunders. I'll give my phone number. It's area code 304-412-4852. And as far as email, Mr.cm Saunders, SAUNDERS, @gmail.com.
Gmail.com. And when you go do a program, approximately how long does your presentation last? It can vary?
It can vary. I've spoken as little as 15 or 20 minutes. I've spoken to Brownie troops, stuff like that. And I've actually taught some community education classes at Ohio University that lasted up to 8 hours. So anywhere in between.
I thought I remember you doing community ed there. So those of you watching, if you're interested for your organization to get someone and talk in expert ways about the Underground Railroad, especially from this particular part of the region, and we're going to get into that in just a moment, well, you would want to make sure you contact Chris. And I'll have him give those one more time before we're done this evening, so that if you want to write that down or you want to try to watch it, I imagine they'll have the captions automatically generated the way they do, where you could kind of get that down. So we appreciate that so much. And maybe what I'll have him do is also come back in on the comments in the show and put his phone number and so on down there. All right. So been at this 15 to 20 years.
Yes,
How
sir.
did you get interested in the Underground Railroad? How did that happen?
Started off just researching local history. A lady from around here named Sharon Coons wrote a book.
Yes.
Compiled a book about local history, and I read it, and my dad just happened to buy it for me, and I read it, And
You
I
were
ended up,
hooked.
I was hooked. I probably read it 150 times, and that's without exaggeration.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I pretty
A
much
lot.
had the thing memorized.
Memorized.
Yeah. And then later on, I was just at the Ironton Library over here some years later looking for a book to read, just on whatever subject. I wasn't even sure. So the Underground Railroad popped into my head, and I typed it in, and they came up with two books, and one of them was called Beyond the River by Anne Hagedorn. And it was a story of John Rankin, who he died just a few blocks from where we are now.
Right,
in
right.
the
museum, if you were interested in that kind of history, the Ironton Museum, Lawrence County Museum here in Ironton, John Rankin passed away there, and they laid his body in state in the window up front, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people came by to pay respects to that Presbyterian firebrand preacher, and especially as an abolitionist. And so
when I read that book, I was hooked, and then to find out that it was in Ironton, so close to home where I live in Burlington, and then I started recognizing names where I'd read Sharon Coons's book so many times.
put two together.
Yeah, and it was like, I know these people.
Right.
So I really did. So it wasn't as if I was just trying to look up some historical individual.
Some far away.
Right, yeah, it was right here,
Right
and I
here.
knew where things were happening, and knew the individuals' names, knew some of their descendants and things like that, and I just started researching and never had any idea that it would lead
Right.
to any of this.
Now, Burlington, Ohio was the original county seat for Lawrence County, Ohio. If you're watching, there's a Lawrence County, Pennsylvania, there's a Lawrence County, Indiana, Lawrence County, Missouri, Lawrence County everywhere.
Right,
We're in
yeah.
Lawrence County, Ohio, if you're watching from other places. And you have a very special tale to tell, a true story about what's called the Burlington 37. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Explain a little bit about, I know that you have got all this information in detail, but talk to us, sketch us this story. What does that mean, Burlington 37?
Burlington 37, just to give a little bit of background on them, they were enslaved in Madison County, excuse me, Madison County, Virginia, by a man by the name of James Twyman. In his will, he manumitted them, which means that he freed them. And in 1849, he had already sent people ahead to find land for them and all that. And they had predetermined and pre-selected Burlington to be their place where they would come to.
I see.
And
that was in the Northwest Territory at that time, and was supposedly
Yes, right.
supposed
Yeah.
to be free.
Yeah, right, exactly.
We found out later that may not have been the case.
Exactly.
Supposed to be on paper. Free.
Exactly, right. The black laws and the whole 9 yards there just kind of made everything not exactly as we think.
Not
Freedom,
exactly as they planned.
right.
Or hoped. And dreamed.
Exactly. But the 37, they came here and settled. It was not the entirety of the 37 that came here. It was roughly 31. 3 ladies stayed behind. They were mother, grandmother, and granddaughter, as well as 3 others who were elderly and invalids. They stayed behind. And then there was one by the name of Washington who simply disappeared. No one knows what happened to
Nobody
him.
knows where he ended up.
Nobody has any idea. He may have decided to run off and made it to freedom. He may have ran off and been captured and sold back into slavery. But no one has any idea. He disappeared. And the other 31 came and settled in Burlington, and many of their descendants are still there today.
Now, when a person who, like this man, sets those enslaved peoples free, at that time the law was they had to provide land for them to go. They couldn't just cut them loose. That
Right.
wasn't allowed. And he wanted to do that so they could be across the river into the Northwest Territory. And so when they got here, did they build cabins? What did they do? Do you know the particulars about that?
Well, they accepted various jobs, but there is at least some indication. It doesn't necessarily speak of the 37 specifically, but they got involved with various trades. One of them was working on the steamships that were going up and down.
I
the
remember
Ohio
that
River.
story. Yeah, I remember that story.
not exactly sure what all of them did as far as occupations or what have
Occupations
you,
and so on.
but that is at least one that is very likely.
And just up the hill from this Burlington area, and you can find this on the map, it's still there, and you could go visit that. In fact, in Burlington, they have a little set of log cabins in the old jail, and you and I did a
Yes.
video at that old
Exactly.
jail. And that was available also to, if you want to take a little trip on the weekend, if you're away from Ironton area, or if you live here in Lawrence County, you may want to just journey over there. The little Burlington village with those log cabins is over against the river. It's very
Correct.
quaint, very nice, very small, but it's a nice little display, not only of log cabin construction in this area at the time, but then the old stone jail. That's
Right.
there.
Yeah. That's the site of the original courthouse as well.
Right, right.
That sits right there, and the jail is there, and then about a block from there, sitting in the S curve, is a building that was once known to be both a doctor's office and a post office. And it's funny because there was a doctor by the name of Camillus Hall, Dr. Camillus Hall, and he was a known Underground Railroad conductor. He was also, obviously he was a doctor, but he was also the postmaster in Burlington for 52 years.
Wow, so he had quite a history there.
Yes, so that building there in the S curve is very likely the oldest, not only the oldest building, but also the oldest government building in Lawrence County.
Still standing.
Yes, and then just about a block from there we have the jail.
Right. Now, the original jail was log, and it burned, and then they built a stone one, and it's quite remarkable. And again, it's locked up a lot of the times, but I'm sure that there are ways in which people could go and visit that and have it open. So I think that there's some real interest there. Again, you can get a hold of Chris. He lives right there in that area, and he could direct you if you have a group or someone that wants to take a tour of the area. I'm sure Chris can either put you on to someone, or he might be able to lead that and make those arrangements. So you want to be sure and think about, how can I be effective to learn more about the background. Now, the reason that it is so difficult to pinpoint what really happened in the Underground Railroad, it wasn't really a railroad. It was a series of networking people trying to help enslaved human beings to escape that institution of slavery, which was wretched. We'll show you in a few minutes why they were trying to do that. Now, there are two sets of these people. There's the whites, like your good doctor, and had he been caught, and maybe he was, he might have gone to jail for a few days and been fined up to $1,000.
Right.
But that was about maximum of what happened to a white person. But if you were a black person, like some of the 37, and they started conducting, as many of them did, they could be killed. They could be beaten to death, because some were. And so you have to understand that, like the one man, Elijah, who came here to Ironton, thought when he crossed the river he was free, and the white people that were helping him said, no, we're sorry, but you're not free. You still got to go north, because people from Kentucky come across with bloodhounds. They capture you and take you back and put you back with your master, so-called master, the devious person that says he owns you, or sells you off to another person.
Absolutely.
Just hideous.
Yes, and there was a there was a whole set of laws that were known as the Ohio Black Laws that were enacted simply to govern African Americans at the time. Everything from they would have to sign a letter stating that they would not be a burden on the community, that they would work, things of that nature. They would also, in many occasions, have to have a white person sign a letter that they would be responsible for them.
Almost like a monitor.
Exactly. So.
It's just a hideous time in the culture, and I said recently in a presentation that I made is that don't even try to defend this. You know, I've heard people say, well, it was a different time, and it was this and it was that.
Right.
You know, just stop. That's what I said in my presentation. Don't even go there. Stop. Right. Because under no circumstances, I agree with John Rankin, under no circumstances can any of you ever decide that this is the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, actually, I just have said over and over again, don't try to defend this whole practice. There's no way, no how can you defend this practice from way back to now. There's just no way. Okay? Well, what I want to do now is I want to warn you again that if you are having any kind of issues with this and grief or tears and so on, what we're about to show you is very disturbing, and it really disturbs me and when he brought this in. But the first thing we want to bring out are these. So I'll let you describe what we've got here. I'll pick that up in a minute.
Okay.
These are real heavy. That's why they're doing that. What do we have here, Chris?
Those are leg irons. Shackles as if, as many people have seen prisoners today on TV being moved from one location to another, and their legs are shackled, and those were the same thing from the 1800s, but they're just made out of cast iron.
And this very heavy, and put on those legs, and those people moved around when they sold them. I know that when they put them up on a cell block like an auction.
Absolutely.
Just hideous. And again, I apologize for the grief that this brings, but these are authentic. These are what was used at the time. These aren't imitation. This is real. Now, let me get down here and pick these back up because I want to show these. These are so heavy, that's why they fell off our little display table. Now, what do we have here?
That's a set of handcuffs from somewhere probably between 1845, 1875 time frame. They would have been used in the slave trade, but they would have also been used for criminals. And then, as you see there, you have a key that fits into the edge, and it actually kind of screws together to keep it closed.
And this is typically made similar to the leg irons, so
right.
You know, there's not a lot of difference. You've got this for the hands, and then that for the legs, and it's very heavy, and you would not have moved well, you know, with that. Now this, we've got this. Now this again, I want to warn you, this is very disturbing. What do we have here?
Those are also handcuffs, but those are for women and children, since they have smaller wrists. Unlike the handcuffs that police officers use today, which are adjustable, these are not. So if you have someone that has a smaller wrist, you need a smaller set of handcuffs.
They just slam them on a child or on a woman whose wrist would be smaller, and they're cuffed just like the male. And this was something interesting. I'm going to let you kind of demonstrate this because I had never seen this before, and again, it's very disturbing.
Right. This is called a nipper, Knipper, and it has a button here, which is pressure sensitive, and if it's pressed, then the bottom part opens up. Well, here we also have another pressure sensitive switch, and if it is placed on someone's wrist and pressed down, it automatically closes. As long as I control this button, then you can't get out. If necessary, and I need to bring you into compliance, I also have a way, because of this handle here, that I can actually twist this and perhaps break your wrist.
It's punishment as well as captivity. And again, this is made, you can tell this is made by a different blacksmith. It's not made on the same fashion as that. You can tell it's for a different intent. It's for a quick capture.
Absolutely.
And then you've got them, and then they could probably drag them over to the wagon and put those leg irons on, and if they have them. And we know that. Now, understand this. Many of you may not remember or realize this. All of Kentucky was a part of Virginia. And all of West Virginia was a part of Virginia. So Virginia came all the way to the Ohio River. Now, that changed as they carved out new states and new counties. But people from Kentucky were bounty hunters, and so they would seek out or follow any blacks that made it this far. And we were right on the Ohio side of the Ohio River. They would come on over here and go way up even to Berlin Crossing. Chillicothe, if you're familiar with the geography of Ohio, they didn't stay right here or stay over in Kentucky. They came over and grabbed these folk and drug them back.
Absolutely.
It was a terrible thing.
In fact, people were not actually free. They could be extradited or what have you, as long as they were in the United States. So they technically were not free until they made their way into Canada.
Right.
Anytime before that, if they were captured, they'd be sold right back into slavery.
And so that was what Elijah, that's what happened to him, was that he was so dismayed and so discouraged because he thought in his mind, if he followed that drinking gourd, which is that you know, the Big Dipper,
Big Dipper.
and the North Star, which they could follow if it were a clear sky. But if there weren't clear skies, they'd have to read moss on trees or just follow their instincts. They were very close to the earth, and so they sort of were able to figure north, south, east, and west a lot better than we could.
Absolutely.
You know, they knew the earth, they knew the ground, they knew the terrains, simply by having lived close and to them. And so when he got here, they told him, no, you're going to have to get in this wagon with a false bottom to it and go up through the furnaces and go to Berlin Crossing and then head north.
Yeah.
And he said, when will I be free? And they said, well, probably if you go to Canada, like you were saying.
Right.
He ended up staying in Sandusky, Ohio, and helped to usher people over into Canada.
Okay.
But he kept saying, my journey be not done.
Right.
That was his famous line, my journey be not done. These are disturbing. This, well, go ahead and describe that if you would, please.
That right there is actually, it's a reproduction, but it is a what would be considered a slave tag. It would be worn around the neck with a piece of leather, and would describe who the individual was and what their occupation was.
This is Black Maria. She's a house slave from Columbia, South Carolina, 1847. Now, it's a reproduction, but it was reproduced by a tag just like this.
Exactly.
Which would have been heavier, but this is stamped out so that you could actually tell who this person was, where they were from, and what they were good at. And again, this whole idea of treating people like animals is just beyond my comprehension, and hopefully beyond yours as well. This is another tag. You can't see this as well. I'll move this a little closer. Why don't you go ahead and describe this while I move this closer?
That's actually a tag to a KKK, Ku Klux Klan tag. If I'm remembering correctly, I think it says on the bottom of it, and it has some different things on it, but there's a fleur-de-lis on it, and an iron cross, and a horseshoe, and an all-seeing eye, and a skull and crossbones. This isn't I have another one that says AYAK, which actually means are you a Klansman? And this could be used, you know, just worn around, or to be able to show friends of yours, or you know, identify yourself as being actually a member of the Klan.
Like a membership card.
Right.
Almost like a membership card. And all that symbolism is very important to them. I wonder what the 1 stands for. It's got a 1 stamped in it. Any guess?
I think it is that, you know, it talks about the white race being number one. But I'm not absolutely certain.
That's, again, like almost like an ID tag. And then this, when he drug this out, this really tore me up. Go ahead and describe this, if you would, please.
That is a waist belt. As we mentioned earlier, you have prisoners and they're wearing handcuffs and leg irons, and that would be worn around the waist, and you'd be shackled to that. There's a piece of it missing, but it would. So just as you see prisoners that are being transported today that are shackled at the waist. But what is that's the most disturbing piece that I have. But that's I'll have you read that. What is actually on it?
It says Negros for sale or let. In other words, they'll rent them to you. And Eliso and Bennett, I would assume that is either the plantation owners or
probably the business owners, the brokers. Owners.
Tobacco, horses, and slaves. All three are linked together. And Richmond, Virginia, 1845. Great big, heavy, thick leather and heavy iron here. Terrible. Just terrible.
Yeah, that when I give my presentations, I try to make sure that I bring those because I don't. A lot of times, history is just simply what you see in books, and I don't want to, or that's what way people identify it, is it's just something that happened in books. But when I place that in someone's hand,
and you feel that,
you feel it. It elicits an emotion.
Tell what it did to me when you drug it out.
Right, and it still does. I mean, if you zoom in here, I have goosebumps
still
right now.
Still moves you, right?
Yeah, and I've had the thing for quite a few years, but every time I see it, it still
And we've learned a new vocabulary, something that I have talked about, and I know you have too, is that, you don't identify these people as slaves because that does not define who they were or are. They were enslaved peoples. They were
Exactly.
human beings that were enslaved by a vicious, terrible set of laws and practices and institutions, and it was institutionalized, and it's hideous. Not everybody believed in that, as was evidenced by people who tried to help them get to freedom. But also, they were not fugitives because they weren't criminals.
No,
You know,
although under law at the
were.
time, under federal law at the time,
Yeah,
they
exactly.
indeed they were.
But we protest when I do when I hear that people say in these presentations, these fugitives, and I'll say, wait, stop. We got to rethink this.
Right.
Because you're not a fugitive just because your skin is black or yellow or white or whatever. You're not a fugitive. You're a human being first, and that's what defines us, as humans. And so we have to think about that. Now, some of them call them freedom seekers.
Yes.
Some people write that. Siebert called them sometimes in his book. There's a man named Siebert who wrote a book. It's out of print now, but it's very, very interesting for all of us who do this kind of research. Call them wayfarers. And at first I didn't like that. But then I started thinking about it. They made their way and they paid their way.
They did.
By terrible cuts and bruises and dogs chasing them and going without water and going without food. They paid their way.
No, absolutely.
So in a way, Siebert was onto something, I think, there. But for me, wayfarer sounds too light and too happy. Freedom seekers, I think, is a little bit better, and that's what they were after.
Absolutely.
Pilgrims, maybe, although they weren't free to be on their journey. So.
Right, and that sound elicits the thought of a completely different time period.
Yeah, exactly. So the Civil War did not end the bias. The Civil War did not end the prejudice, but it did slow down the folk. And we talked a little bit earlier about that this was not a real railroad, although they followed some rail tracks.
Sure.
Because railroad was becoming a very important way of transporting goods and travel.
Right.
It was not all in tunnels, although there were tunnels used.
Sure.
So they didn't construct a highway or a railway,
No.
but they made use of everything: barns, wagons, homes,
Crawl
spaces, everything.
Caves, anything.
And they called to people these places where it was safe for them stations. They called conductors people like, if you were to lead me 12 miles up the way. And the Presbyterians preached hard against this.
Absolutely.
And I still haven't discovered for sure how that happened, but I think that's so cool. And the Quakers, they did too. And the Quakers I more understand.
As did the
Methodists
Methodists
also.
as well.
Yeah. And I think there were a lot of people from the north side of thinking, the Northerners, more into that than a lot of folk in the South. And that's no slam on you folk who watch us from South Carolina or Texas. It's just the reality. It was a hideous, vicious time. And, tell me what moves you now. Have you found a new story, or is there one story you go back to?
No, one that we were just, because we're so close down here and we're coming, out here in Ironton, and the Ohio River's just a few blocks away. One particular story that just entered my mind while we're sitting here talking was one of some people who were they were freedom seekers. They had made their way over into Ohio. Well, there were some young men. I'm not exactly sure of their age, but I would guess teenagers or perhaps young 20s, feeling a little rambunctious and all that. And they had heard that there were going to be freedom seekers in the area, and they decided that they were going to capture them for the reward. And so the freedom seekers ended up coming across the river at the boat landing here in Ironton. And one guy, there was a group of these young men who were going to attempt to capture them. They had left him kind of stands guard kind of at a lumber yard, and the others had gone off somewhere. And he saw these guys come across, the freedom seekers. These were not small boys.
Yeah.
Yeah, these were men who were 18 to 30 years old, years of working hard in the fields, big shoulders and all that. So, right, think football players today.
Yes, right.
And he saw him and he just hid. He decided that he wanted no part of it. Well, his friends came back and a little while later, and he told him what he had seen, and they decided, well, we're going to go get him, and they did, and they caught up with him, and the freedom seekers like to beat him half to death.
Yes.
It was no part of a match. They had clubs and all that other, and they were literally fighting for their lives, and these were strong men.
And they wanted that freedom.
And you weren't taking it away from them without a fight. And they really put a hurting on this group of guys. And the one guy who had been standing guard, who had originally seen them, I guess he decided to take off, and he went on back home, and he decided there at that time that he would never attempt to do that again. And in fact, he ultimately changed his position on the issue.
A lot of people did that. Chris Saunders, a historian and an expert on the Underground Railroad, especially in this whole area here. No matter where you're from, West Virginia, Kentucky, here in Ohio, or maybe other parts, I'm sure that if you covered his expenses, well, he'd be glad to come and speak to your group as well. We're not pushing him, but we did want to let you know that he's available. And a lot of times people love to hear these stories. And it draws us back to a time that we are not proud of. And so we have to come to terms with this and figure out, like I said, just don't try to defend this.
Right.
Chris, if you would, please give them your phone number one more time.
My phone number is area code 304-412-4852. Once again, it's 304-412-4852.
Chris Saunders, he lives down in the Burlington area, so he comes from the history of that Burlington area. The Macedonia Church is just up the hill from where he lives. And he's an expert on that cemetery and all kinds of things he can talk to you about. Much more time than we have today, but we wanted to make sure we brought Chris to you. Chris is also on Facebook, and so you can find him on Facebook. You'll know him by his little beard there.
And the shining head.
Chris, thank you so much for being on All Points. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr.
And
Lucas.
it was very moving, and it's touching, and it's an emotional issue, and yet it needs to be told. I'm Dr. Dave Lucas. You're watching All Points. We appreciate you being here this week. Don't forget next week, if you're wanting to know more about what's happening in Southern Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, or many other parts, please tune us in, All Points, 6 p.m. on Thursdays, right here on All Points, the page. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.